Ramadan Kareem, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the Emirates MBD's first Sustainability Now panel discussion, discussing on a recent study released by Sustainable Square, the 2018 State of Sustainability and CSR in the Middle East and North Africa, which can be viewed below in the description on Facebook. My name is Michelle Wong, and I lead the corporate responsibility team here at Emirates MBD. And our panelists today include Monam Bellalahom, Managing Partner of Sustainable Square, Aula Al-Haj Hussein, Corporate Citizenship Manager at Crescent Enterprise, and Dr. Wadah Ghanem, Senior Director of Sustainability, Operational and Business Excellence at ENOC. Today's panel discussion will be approximately 45 minutes long. We welcome questions from the viewers today relating on the study that was released on Sunday. Any complaints and product-related inquiries at the bank will be forwarded to the appropriate person, and someone will get back to you as soon as possible. A reminder that this is focused on the study alone. The study includes 9 sections, and unfortunately we won't have enough time to go through all 9 sections, but you're welcome to ask questions with any parts of the study. So I'd like to kick it off with the first question to Mona. Can you please explain to us the story behind the study?
First, thank you so much, Michelle, for having us here. Basically, like during the last 8 years since the inception and establishment of Sustainable Square, we've been dealing with a lot of private sector organizations all the way from the UAE to Morocco, and then there was a clear gap there, like in terms of data related to CSR and sustainability in the Arab region. And whenever we go to conferences, whenever we go to presentations, we always see a challenge that we don't have access to quantitative data from the Arab world. And all the practitioners, they refer to international practices, international studies, international researchers when it comes to data. So we said, okay, enough is enough. It's the time today, to try to invest into the first study for CSR and sustainability in the Arab region in order to generate and propagate data related to the region itself. And that's how we've decided to run the first Mena CSR and sustainability study, looking at the private sector and organizations all the way from UAE to Morocco, 18 countries across 16 industries, to try to understand the trends and the practices and the achievements when it comes to CSR and sustainability in the private sector. And here, the time has come, to produce the first study, and we're super proud of this. And I would like to extend my acknowledgement, to Emirates MBD for supporting such a study, because without this support, generous support, we wouldn't have been able to do it.
Well, thank you, Monam. Well, I wanted to ask our other panelists what you thought about the study.
Well, I think it's really important to start with having a base. I was just discussing with Munaim right now. It's quite important to have an overview, an overlook of what's going on in the sector. Nevertheless, there's a big room to dig more into the details and know more under each of the chapters in the survey. What is the context of the answers, and where is this coming from? So the how and why are still there to be covered, but this is absolutely a very important step to start with.
I think the study is very good. I've had a look at mainly the highlights and the executive summary. A few good things about the study. One of them is the size, really, of the sample size for what we're trying to look for here. Makes it extremely meaningful, makes the data extremely important and very valuable. And I think such a study, to have this kind of baseline data that we can use for longitudinal studies in the future to see how perceptions are going to change, because these questionnaires were really looking at the perceptions and the understanding of people within these different industries within the MENA region and the Arab world. And I think it's important, and it's good then to compare, for example, certain positions on issues such as education or gender equality or whatever, and compare that with other clusters, so sort of say the European cluster or the North American kind of cluster, and see how there is what kind of difference. So going back to what Mulam said, that it's useful to have this kind of data and have this kind of information, because for many years we've been talking about best practice and talking about what's happening in other places in the world. The Arab world has got its own, like any other part of the world, has got its own peculiarities, it's got its own drivers within the society, within the culture, and a lot is changing. So I think it's a very valuable study, really.
So many of our viewers might be from different private sector industries here today. So can you guys think of how this might be helpful and useful to companies through the data of this study? Start with Mona, maybe.
So if I can start with, a lot of organizations and would like to benchmark themselves to the peers. So if I'm a bank, I would like to know what the other banking sector know, how they're adopting CSR and sustainability in their daily practice, how are they integrating sustainability and CSR, how are they disclosing on these practices, how are they aligning with the global agendas like the Sustainable Development Goals, commitment of every government. Every industry is trying to look at what the peers are doing. This is a very valuable data and study that can help them to understand what the others are doing and what can I implement and integrate as part of my business practices today.
Lovely. And can you think of how this might help you in your personal roles in your different companies?
It was actually quite useful also to know what are the main topics and the main focus areas that the region is focusing on. And as I mentioned, for me, it triggers a lot of questions. Why, for instance, that's why the context for me is quite important, is why, for instance, gender equality was not at the top areas, and where it was mentioned and where it was not. So, for me, I feel like I needed a second version of this survey, more detailed. But it start building a picture of what's going on in the region. So the first thing I was looking at is the focus areas in the region, and what are the sectors which we're interested in answering, because that also shows you how engaged they are in that sort of studies, and the sort of public engagement and sharing information about what they're doing.
I mean, for me, I recall about less than 6 months ago, we were at a panel in Mumbai with the IOD in India, and we had a discussion about the SDGs and what directors of companies and the executive management should be really sort of looking at and kind of developing when it comes to their programs with regards to aligning with the strategic development goals of the UN. And one of the issues that was raised is that so many companies are actually moving towards that direction of driving and choosing some SDGs to sort of and put some initiatives and work on. The issue is that because of, depending on where we are, and probably we could say in the MENA region, we're probably in a maturing phase. Many of the organizations may end up focusing on the same sort of SDGs. And the whole point is with the 17 SDGs is that if everybody does a contribution, everybody in the world sort of works on this at a nation level or at the private or the public sector level, we will cover all the issues within the 17 areas. But if we all focus on the same areas, then what's going to happen is that we're going to be over-supporting certain areas and neglecting other areas. So for example, we might focus on clean production and not focus enough on education. So the study is very important because it gives you an indication of who's working on what and where their focus areas are. So within this industry. So it's sort of to organize at a more macro level the investment of time and resources and efforts for these organizations, because as senior leaders of organizations then start to focus on saying, well, we want to align with this and align with that. They should understand what they're doing as an industry, how they can contribute. And every industry has its own way of contributing depending on the location that they're working in and then in the nature of their business. I'll give you just one last example of, in the oil and gas. If I'm oil and gas and I work only in upstream, then I have different kind of impacts and different kind of contributions I can make. Whereas if I'm working in downstream and I'm working closer with B2C, business to sort of customer businesses, then it's a different type of focus area. So the study gives you that kind of insight and where it allows, I think, senior leadership later on, especially in the way that it's presented in a very easy to sort of review fashion. So.
You jumped into right into one of the questions I wanted to ask you. In the study, 78% of oil and gas companies are aligning with one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. I was wondering, why do you think that there's so many companies in this specific industry that is aligning themselves with the SDGs in comparison to the other industries?
I think, you know, the maturity, the oil and gas business, I mean, I like to compare it to the aviation industry. The aviation industry in the last 20, 30 years have significantly improved their contribution, for example, to reliability and safety. You know, it's much safer to be in the air in a big plane than you are, you know, crossing the road, you know, in your neighborhood. The industry has become very much safer. Oil and gas industry has also become safer, more reliable, and more aware, and a lot of the you know, unfortunate incidents that it's faced has taught it some good lessons, and they've played a very important role in trying to improve the way that they do things. They're at the forefront also of providing and fueling nations with regards to in terms of their energy needs, if it's in the aviation sector or the road transport sector or in the energy production sector. So, you know, the fuel specifications are becoming, you know, cleaner fuels. We're trying to look at using, you know, more hybrid type systems. Where it's part of the maturity and the development and the transformation within this industry, and that's probably why they've taken up the SDGs quite seriously. They've always been looked at as, oh, you know, maybe the biggest polluters. They're not necessarily the biggest polluters in the world. We're not going to get into who are the biggest polluters in the world, but they make a significant contribution. But I think likewise they're making a significant effort, and that's reflected in the report.
And Mena,
yeah, if I may add something to what Dr. Wadah has mentioned right now. All these giant big oil and gas companies, we call them nation builders. Like they have a magnificent economic, direct and indirect economic impact. If I look at companies like ENOC or ADNOC in Abu Dhabi or Saudi Aramco or Babco in Bahrain, these companies, they have their weight, they have tremendously contributed to the development of societies, and they build nations. And since the government, they have committed and put their commitments out there for the Sustainable Development Goals, all these governments. So it makes sense for all these companies to be the pioneers when it comes to driving that impact. And that's why you see that 78% of these oil and gas companies, they were the most, or the pioneers when it comes to aligning with the SDGs, because it's a government commitment and they have to be in the forefront, as you mentioned yourself.
Ola, how about in Crescent Enterprises? What are some of the things that you've done to align with the SDGs?
So actually, we try to align our focus areas with the nature of our business, and the second dimension that we took is the SDGs. So every single thing that we do in the social investment side, it has to be aligned with the SDGs, and it has to be reported also according to the SDGs best practices. But one of the areas that we were trying to work at the sector level is how we can report back at the national level and show, you know, the impact of what we're doing. So it's not only aligning our operations, but it has to reflect at the national level. That's something that we're always discussing in our Majlis, to find a way, you know, to feed into the national impact. Yeah, but the best way, actually, if you're asking me as an organization, as a social portfolio, is from day one, you have to look at the nature of your business and try to find out with your stakeholders and how you can find out the focus areas and align them to the SDGs. That's, I think that's compulsory in our days now.
Amazing, thank you. I just wanted to take this opportunity to remind all of our viewers on all of our platforms that you can submit your questions below for any of our panelists to answer you in regards to the study. Any products or service inquiries or comments will be directed to the appropriate person at the bank to be responded later. My next question, you talked a little bit about reporting, Ala. So what happens to a company that reports upon their sustainability performance? What have you seen in the trends today in the Middle East and North Africa?
So, I mean, reporting is quite important because it's a milestone in the, you know, it's a milestone phase in the journey where where you stop and you pause and you evaluate what you have done to date in terms of your sustainability journey. However, we have actually discussed that also previously. The standards that are provided and available in the market are a bit confusing in a way. You have a lot of frameworks. The GRI is the most famous one and the most popular one. It lacks, though, the context. So if you only focus on GRI standards without adding to it the context and where you're coming from, it will still give information, but it wouldn't really give full information, a full picture of what's going on in terms of performance. So it really depends on the maturity of the company and the sector, on how they report on themselves. So first of all, it's a tool for ourselves to evaluate where we are in the journey, but also to provide input for the sector on the best practices, lessons learned. And unfortunately, what you can see in the region, that the report is more used as a marketing tool or a PR tool, but it also depends on the context in the market itself. So in some other mature markets, you will see, a more sort of direction into sharing lessons learned and turn it into lessons learned tone, rather than only celebrating success. But I think that's a sort of common effort that comes from all sectors at a national also level, where the reporting should be more about sharing lessons learned and best practices, not only using it as a PR tool.
Lovely. Mona, so you mentioned the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative.
Yeah.
Monam, what makes the GRI standards the global benchmark for sustainability reporting?
That's a tough question, because there are so many frameworks, as Ola mentioned, right? Right now, there are so many frameworks. The GRI was historically one of the oldest, let's say, frameworks that was developed over years, to today offer like a robust index for companies, to report on their sustainability metrics and their ESG disclosure. It's not that this framework is good or the other is bad. It's like what makes more business sense for the business you're running. You can just align with the 10 principles of the United Nations Global Compact, and you report on your communication progress, and it can create a meaningful story to your stakeholders. So what do your stakeholders expect? If you are reporting data to your investors are requesting 1 to 3 indicators, specific indicators that are aligned with GRI, then report on GRI. If your investors or your stakeholders or your government or the regulator is requesting you to report on a specific standard that is aligned with another one that is connected to your industry, then do it. So nobody is obliged to issue or to align its report or its disclosure with the GRI report, but align with whatever is meaningful to your stakeholders and to your business at the same time.
And why do you think that most people use the GRI?
Because it's the commonly used framework globally. It has developed over years. It has developed and created indicators that are probably connected with every single industry today. They have even created sector supplements, that if you are in the oil and gas industry, you get a set of indicators that are aligned with the oil and gas. If you are in telecommunication, you get a set of indicators that are aligned with your specific industry. So that's what makes it popular today.
Lovely. So, did you want to add something?
No, actually, just an idea that I think we discussed it also in one of our Majlis sessions. Why don't we have our own like Mena region GRI context, especially for the region? One of the main challenges for the GRI is the context and how it's to date it's failing to show the context. But it's at the same time it acknowledged that context is quite important in order to give the full picture of what's going on. So I always ask myself this question on why don't we have a sort of adaptation version of the GRI, especially for the region. And hopefully, since you have started now with the survey, so maybe in 5 or 10 years from now, you can contextualize the GRI for our region.
Dr. Wada?
I don't know. I mean, as Mena said, the GRI framework has been around for many years. now. I mean, compared to other frameworks, but other frameworks have also been developed. I think the uptake has been highest. I mean, I think the GRI organization also developed certain kind of communities, and then from those communities also they developed different sector groups, as Mena said, and also they've been very steadfast with regards to producing different reporting versions and standards. So there's been a lot of development. So they've occupied that space, and they probably did quite well. But there are other frameworks that you can report to. The most important thing is to actually, for an organization, I think, before you even choose a framework, is to really understand why you want to talk about your organization's sustainability. You need to have that dialogue with your key stakeholders. Then you need to go through and use various different tools, like we call it materiality assessments, and actually trying to understand. And I think materiality assessments is really, really important, because it's not about what you think is important as an organization. In sustainability, it is about, it's more about that holistic understanding of, how your internal and your external stakeholders really understand what is important, where they see the role that you play is extremely important within the industry or whatever, within the society you operate in. So I think the GRI standard is good. I mean, there was a lot of talk about, do you need to get reports which are validated and verified and all this. I think what's most important is to have a framework, and as Ola said, understand the context of your organization, where your impacts are, and work on that, because that's really where your organization will be adding value to society, which they.
I would like to echo Dr. Wadah on this, especially when it comes to strategic planning, sustainability strategic planning. It's not only about integrating the vision, your sustainability vision into your strategic plan as an item, as a tick the box sort of thing, but it's more about starting and initiating a conversation with all of your stakeholders. And you see in the sector a different version of doing this. So you see some people, they just do it once per year, just also to tick a box. And it's not about the intention, because they don't really have the intention. Sometimes it really depends on the maturity and the awareness of how properly it has to be made. So some people, they would just gather everyone for one time per year just to make sure that everything is proper. But you also see at the other end some companies, some organizations, and I'm quite proud to be part of an organization, Crescent Enterprises, where we do continuous conversation, on regular basis. So it's a relationship management rather than just bringing them once, plan, and then evaluate after some time. So it's a call for all organizations to have this genuine sort of relationship and partnership with your stakeholders. And one would argue that if it might be a little bit expensive in terms of resources to spend time and efforts in bringing people every here and then and gather them to see where you are, but it's the cost is priceless, not in terms of the harm that this could do if you don't do it, but there are lots of opportunities that you would miss if you don't see them. A lot of, very small examples. I may now come up with just give you one example of how it goes on at Crescent, but a lot of opportunities that come through the year, that if you don't have this sort of permanent and continuous relationship with your partners, you would never know about it. And the risk of this, it's never estimated properly, because you don't know what's there. But if you don't see them, if you don't listen to them, you'll never know what's there. So it's about mitigating risk, but it's also about not missing opportunities which are there. And it's not only about stakeholders outside, like external stakeholders, internal stakeholders. Sometimes your own employees, they know a lot. They have a lot of knowledge about products, about how you can make things more efficiently. If you don't listen to them, you'll never know what's going on.
I have a question related to you, to this question for you, but I just wanted to take a moment to thank our audience on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube for tuning in. And please remember that you are part of this conversation. Please ask your questions in the comment section below. We'd be happy to take any of your questions and comments in the audience today. Mona, she talked a lot about call to action, engaging stakeholders, the experience, and you mentioned that a lot of companies just do it to tick the box. So what are some of the things that we can do to mitigate that?
Let me just comment on this, and I will link it to your question. I think one of the key learnings of the global economic crisis back in 2007 that we've all learned as a private sector that we cannot make it if we're going to conduct our business exclusively from the society, from the stakeholders. We can only make it if we conduct an inclusive business. And what's an inclusive business? Is a business that interacts as much as possible with its stakeholders in order to mitigate risk, as at the same time identify opportunities like Ola mentioned right now. So what I'm saying today that it's not stakeholder engagement or stakeholder management. It's not a side dish anymore. It has to be like a main dish out there, discussed at the board level, discussed at the C-suite level all the time in every single meeting. How can we mitigate and sustain risks, or mitigate risks actually that are connected to specific stakeholders, and work to last that relationship with every stakeholder by injecting a few practices that can last that relationship and then create opportunities over it.
Sorry, can I? It's not only at the leadership level, because sometimes you find a very mature leadership in some organization, but it has to become a culture. It has to become the purpose and the motive of each employee in an organization, and that takes a long time. It takes a long journey to have every single person in an organization to think in tune with the rest of the team, including the leadership. Sometimes you find a lot of gap between leadership and we tend to focus on leadership because they are the ones who make decisions, but honestly they can't do anything by their own if they don't have the tools and if their spirit and culture is not spread across the operations. So it's a call also to have it
streamline it.
Absolutely.
It seems like Enoch has a culture of sustainability spread throughout. Can you tell us how your company has spread it throughout the culture?
I mean, I don't know really if any organization has got sustainability culture really spread through every single level within the organization. I mean, Enoch is a very, very diverse company, 30 plus operating different kind of operating companies and operating different areas, B2B, B2C businesses, and operating also in different parts of the world. But one thing that has been done and really driven the organization for a very long time has been sort of more towards the sort of being a responsible business, being given the opportunity here, especially in Dubai, but also in the UAE and other places in the world where we operate, given a position to sort of develop and create value, and out of that creation of value as an organization, we've always seen providing employment opportunities, connecting and working within the supply chain and providing areas where we operate, dealing with different stakeholders, including lenders and whatever. We've always seen it as a very, very important way of being inclusive, because as an organization we've had to really develop against many odds and challenges. Fuel prices were fixed at one time. It was very, very difficult for us to grow. I mean, the oil and gas business is very much a cash intensive business. So I think we've come from a background where, as an organization, we've had sustainability as a core value within the organization. We've also, when we built our different assets, if it's within the retail downstream or within the midstream, kind of processing facilities and stuff like that, we've always taken into account the development of these assets whilst not having massive impacts on the environment. So I think sustainability has been part of the DNA of Enoch for the past 25 plus years. some of the subsidiaries within ENOC have been around for much longer. But what we've done actually in the past few years is that we've sort of integrated this reporting, and now a lot of organizations, a lot of our stakeholders are saying, oh wow, we've read your sustainability report and it's very good. And it is. I mean, I invite anybody watching this to actually go and look up our sustainability report. It really is very highly transparent. We've received a lot of good commendation. We've received a lot of awards for it, and because we say it as it is. We really do say it as it is. I mean, it's not about really advertising. I don't think ENOC would significantly improve its income because it has a good sustainability report. We truly believe that working with our stakeholders, internal and external, creates value. And the reason for that is because, as I said, if you look at our history, we've always been like that. So we know that it makes good business sense. So sustainability is good business sense. It's not about, it's not only about, the environment and hugging trees and things like that. Yeah, it's good, it really creates long-term value.
Absolutely. We actually have a question from Twitter, from Yellow Door Energy, a startup on solar panel here based in the UAE. How do you think renewable energy will play a role in sustainability in the Mena region? And in your research, did your respondents bring up solar or wind as a potential solution? So I'll start with Monam, and maybe if you will have something else to add.
The study didn't ask per se, whether the private sector has adopted this kind of practices, because we try to focus on the strategy and the management of the practice itself. So whether the private sector has aligned or put practices related to climate change and mitigating climate risk. So we didn't really specifically ask whether they have adopted wind or solar practices as per se.
Lovely. Did you have something to add? I know that you're very passionate.
No, I think definitely it's a good question. I think. Solar and maybe in this area definitely solar, and maybe to some extent wind and other alternatives are going to grow, and they should, because especially in terms of the both the domestic and kind of commercial markets, it makes really very good sense in so many ways. Remember that the technology is improving. Just to give you an example of, just to be pragmatic, all our retail sites and the standard design for all our retail stations today are with solar panels. These solar panels, in the past, when we first wanted to really install them more than a decade ago, and retrofit them to our operating retail sites, these solar panels were okay. The efficiency wasn't very high, but we were still willing to invest and put these solar panels. There were some other issues relating to how we're going to clean them, how we're going to increase to make sure that they can be operated optimally. The biggest issue that we had is that these panels were too heavy. So imagine you have the canopy on top of a retail site where and it would have been just unsafe for us to install all this equipment because they were too heavy. Today, the solar panels are something like, if you just compare us back 10 years ago, 10 years ago, solar panels are now a sixth to an eighth of the weight because of the technology and the materials and stuff like that. So as the technology is changing, it's very difficult for us to actually estimate the uptake. But one thing for sure is that it's accelerating. And probably is going to be exponential. I hope so anyway.
I think we all hope for that in the panel. We have a couple of comments. One, we want to say thank you to Sujan from Facebook for his positive feedback. Thank you so much for engaging and participating with us today. Another question from Facebook from LOD. How do you implement a sustainability strategy across an entire organization? So I will let Crescent Enterprise let us.
Can you repeat the question, please?
How do you implement a sustainability strategy across an entire organization?
So if you're really starting the exercise properly, it will drive itself automatically. So the plan will start with engaging with all your stakeholders. So listening to your stakeholders all through the year, and it shouldn't be only listening for chit-chatting thing. You know, you have to have a result at the end of each meeting where you come up with a win-win formula for all the parties who are engaged. And then this win-win formula will be translated into a plan. So I don't know how to put it in a practical way, but just, I mean, to sum it up, it's just about engaging continuously, and after each engagement you'll have to have a plan on how the voice of on how the ideas or the suggestion which came from the stakeholders are sort of formulated into a plan, and then the plan is implemented, and after some time you have to set a regular meeting to monitor the implementation. So yeah.
Mena, you work with lots of companies, and you have seen and kind of observed all the companies in the MENA region. Do you have any examples of how it's been successfully, a sustainability strategy has successfully been implemented across an entire organization?
Well, the best example I will talk about is MRSMBD, of course. It's not because we are here, but we have, at Sustainable Square, we had the chance to start working with MRSMBD during the last 5 years, and you know this, Michelle. We have seen that seriousness when it comes, you know, to the adoption of sustainability, not because it's a good thing, because it made sense to the business. It made sense to all the stakeholders. So whenever you engage with the community, there was a clear business sense on how you can drive an impact on the community. Whenever you talk to your facility team on management of resources within the bank and the assets and the branches and how we can make them more optimized and then efficient, and then there was a clear business sense for adopting sustainability. Whenever you talk to your procurement, whenever you talk to your HR and engaging your employees into one of the most successful volunteering programs in the Middle East, which is the Exchanger. You know, how you have engaged the entire workforce, you know, into driving a social impact in the community. I think there was the practice itself was taken in a very serious manner, and there was a clear business case for it. With every single step you've done, a clear, proper business case. I remember all this deck, you know, that we have developed, you know, to different managers within the bank, and it made sense because after 5 years of all that hard work, you can see the result today that the bank is one of the most prominent financial institutions in the Middle East, and not just because of its financial products, but then for the impact it's creating for the community and its customers at the same time.
I would like to highlight, to tap into one of the points that Mun'im said. So to evaluate, you know, the achievement, it takes time. You can't see the journey after 1 year. You really have to give it some time, like not less than 3 to 4 years until you see the results in terms of trust and credibility building with your communities, in terms of either the internal or the external community, but also for the organization itself, in order to see the impact that it shows in the community. It will take some time. So it's not a short-term journey. And maybe that's why sustainability, it's a bit sometimes challenging, because for people who lack patience, an organization who lack patience, it's not something that you can invest in for 1 or 2 years. It's a long-term investment.
So thank you, Maram, and thank you. You've all mentioned the importance of stakeholder engagement. It's a very important endeavor. It's no longer a side dish, as you said. What are some of the examples of best practices to engage your stakeholders, internal or external? And you mentioned, you know, a barrier would be costs. So are there any cost-saving methods to engage your stakeholders to benefit your organization?
I want to answer this question and go back also to the previous question. You know, when an organization, you know, says, okay, well, I'm going to start with sustainability. I mean, let's talk about an organization that's been running within a certain sector for the last 20 years. I mean, the question you must ask yourself, definitely they had some sustainability in place, you know, otherwise they wouldn't have lasted 20 years, you know. They would have had to be there. And therefore, what I think we should do with regards to the strategy of developing our sustainability, and this, I guess, you know, what we did, we went back. I mean, the oil and gas industry, for example, worked on fuel specification to try to remove lead from, for example, of gasoline back in 2000, and that discussion was taking place back in the late 90s. We had to look at, you know, health and safety is extremely important, you know. Gender equality, and to go back to your question about opportunities. Oil and gas industry today, to many people maybe who are watching this today, and a lot of the younger generation, the oil and gas industry is not as attractive as it used to be before. So we are facing that problem of attracting people. Our industry is changing. We're not the same kind of industry that we were before. But also more so, females don't like to join our industry. And we have a lot of engineers, we have a lot of scientists, we have a lot of other skilled people working, both male and female. And if we're not able to attract them, it becomes an issue for us, because we have to develop this capacity to manage our business in the future. So there's a big opportunity for us, and that's really what sustainability is all about. Sustainability is not about producing a nice report and sort of an annual report, and as I said, having that annual event and stuff like that. It's not about that. It's about every day. It's about understanding your business, understanding the strategy of your business, understanding how you're going to last. You're going to be here today, you're going to be there tomorrow, and you're going to be there after tomorrow, and thinking about after tomorrow.
Why do you think that women are not interested in the oil and gas sector, and what can companies like yourself do to encourage more women to apply for these types of roles?
No, I mean, when I said this, first of all, I was saying this in the context of especially here in the MENA region, because females, say for example the UAE national females, generally they looked at the industry. Okay, we'd have to work out there in the field, work out. And it's not sort of always pleasant working environments. It's pretty hot, pretty dusty. It's not an easy environment to work on. This doesn't mean that we have many. We had the first female refinery engineer in Dubai. We had the first female refueling operator in Dubai International Airport. We had one of the very few and first females that working in laboratories, in the refinery laboratories in Dubai. So no, it's not as attractive as a sort of as an industry. It's just not attractive, and sometimes their family also puts some pressure. Don't work in this kind of field. There's other options for you, and there are other options in other areas, but the industry is very important. And I go back to what Mun'im said, at the beginning of this discussion, that the oil and gas industry is a backbone to the economy. It's a backbone to the social development, and the socioeconomic value that it brings is really large. So it's very important to be very inclusive of and try to have as many access to as many people as that we can. And the females are half the population. Actually, they're slightly above half the population, 52 or 53%. So,
one of the best practices when it comes to gender equality, what we have done as part of our stakeholder engagement, we noticed that entrepreneurs, like women entrepreneurs, don't really take sort of equivalent highlight of their of the male entrepreneurs, for instance. So the first best practice that we followed is we didn't work on this by our own, Crescent Enterprises. We always believe that even as a company, we shouldn't be functioning alone in the sector. So we brought with us similar companies who work on the same sort of focus area, and we try to raise awareness about women entrepreneurs, and build the capacities of women and introduce them to the sector, along with academia, with the American University of Sharjah. So it's also a call of not to work in silos as companies, but to bring companies together and to work with other sectors like government or academia in order to achieve something. And this also as a result of stakeholder engagement as a larger circle, and with other sectors.
Lovely, thank you. So I just want to remind the audience we have a few minutes left, so please ask your questions as soon as possible. We have one from YouTube. Dima is asking, what United Nations Sustainable Development Goals do most companies in the MENA region contribute to? So Monam, would you like to take this question?
I want to comment on that question in general, because some of the, I wouldn't say bad practice, but then a common practice in the private sector, the Arab world, when the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals was always nice, colorful cubes being spread in the office there, and because they're so nice, they're so beautiful, right? The private sector in the Arab world hasn't really picked up on the SDGs as an investment opportunity, because when these Sustainable Development Goals, I remember Dr. Waddah, we had so many conversations about this. When these Sustainable Development Goals, they came live, they offered $12 trillion of opportunities, so business opportunities for the private sector, which means that they did not come as a CSR cause-related marketing, CSR programs. They are business opportunities that when you align with them, you create and you innovate into products and services that can solve all these Sustainable Development Goals, eventually impact the community and make money at the same time. Unfortunately, the private sector in the Arab world still hasn't really understand that. They're still taking it from a CSR perspective, from a charity perspective. They do blood donation and they align it with health, SDG for health. They do like different beach cleanups, and they okay, we're doing some environmental, and then we align with the SDGs for the environmental impact, but they're not taking it seriously as a business opportunity yet. There are some organizations in the Arab world or in the Middle East or in the UAE here that are really picked up on that, and they're really introducing new products and services that are really connected to some of these SDGs. Eventually, they're gonna lead the way, and then they create good success stories for the other private sector in the Arab world to show them the path.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Did you have anything else to contribute to this?
I'm not sure if this is really the responsibility of the private sector. This is one of the challenges that the SDGs themselves they're facing. They're quite flexible and quite vague. So everything can contribute to SDGs. But at the end of the day, maybe small things like beach cleaning and these sort of stuff, they wouldn't really be impactful when it comes to SDGs. So I think, I mean, this is a global discussion. There is a need to bring in a sort of more focused indicators or a framework on how you can align your achievements to the SDGs so you can make them more impactful. But it's beyond the corporates and the companies' capacities.
Do you agree?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think as I said before, if we don't do this in a bit of a systematic and discuss this at a more macro level between the different organizations which are around and know who's focusing on what, we might end up actually focusing on one area and investing a lot of that area and neglecting other areas. But I mean, to answer this question, I think there are certain areas where traditionally in the MENA area, at least especially here, I would say the UAE, focus on poverty eradication, education, because we have a young population. In the UAE, the population, 85% of the population is below the age of 40. 50% are between the age of 20 and 40. So education is extremely important. So there's traditionally some focus in that area. There's been some focus on obviously water treatment and looking at water scarcity issues and stuff like that. I think we really are starting to understand the impact on life below water. We are a nation that was very much based, the staple diet was from the sea. So there are certain areas, but I think the question is that we need to understand that it's not about focusing on the SDGs, even as organizations from a very, kind of position which is more emotional, but really to understand where we can really invest. And I think Mena would agree with me. We've discussed a lot about social impact and social investment. So we invest in certain areas. It looks good. It sounds good. It makes us feel good. But what is the impact for every dollar that we invest? And I think private sector especially needs to build more awareness and sort of understand what to invest in to get the maximum return on investment.
Thank you so much, Dr. Waddah. Ola, Monam, this is all the time that we have. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to our viewers who participated in our panel and asked us questions. A reminder that you can visit all of our channels or the Sustainable Square website to have full access to the report. I want to wish everybody a blessed Ramadan, and I look forward to having you in our next Sustainability Now segment. Take care.